It's fine. Thanks for letting me know.
That might be a browser. That might be
So they can hear everything that's on.
as long as you're in the mic, yeah.
And one other brief announcement before we begin. All the presentations, all the PowerPoints, all the media that we will be showing you is available on a website for the symposium. So we'll make all of that, we'll upload all of that, and you can download all of that so you don't have to take notes of all the URLs and everything. All of this is available for you. Okay, I think we're about ready to begin. Well, welcome. My name is COERLL Blyth. I'm the director of COERLL. That's how we pronounce it. It stands for the Center for Open Educational Resources and Language Learning, and we're coming here today to you from the University of Texas at Austin, Texas. We have a little bit of coordination here. It's a little logistical nightmares, but I think we're okay with things now. We're coming to you on the internet with Adobe Connect. And we want this to be interactive, so we have a chat room function on Adobe Connect. So all of those people who are joining us virtually, you can join the discussion. We have somebody monitoring the discussion, and she will be telling me what's going on in the chat room. So the place to begin, of course, is this is a symposium. And symposium typically means, if you look it up in a dictionary, it means then a discussion of a single topic, and our topic here today is open education. And it typically includes many different speakers. And all of you, I hope, will participate. We want to emphasize the notion of participation. This is about participatory culture, a culture of participation. So there are invited speakers, but I really expect all of you to take part. And we're going to make sure you take part by having activities and panels, and it will be highly interactive. And of course, we have then the virtual audience and the audience here in Austin. But the word symposium, the etymology is interesting. It's from the Greek, and it actually originally meant a drinking party. So we want to kind of combine these two ideas of a convivial atmosphere where there's lots of food. Unfortunately, those of you in the virtual environment don't know, but we have a lot of food in the back. So it's a gathering to discuss an intellectual topic, and it should be informal, it should be convivial, and we should have a good intellectual conversation. So the agenda for today, actually we've broken this symposium. It'll go over 2 days. But today's, we have 2 sessions. And the first session we're calling Defining Open Education. That's the morning session, because that's the place to begin. We come from different parts of this knowledge ecology, and not all of you know exactly what we mean when we use the term OER. So the place to begin is really defining the basics of open education. The next session in the afternoon will then be bringing open education into the foreign language classroom. So there we'll start to talk about more the practical realities of how do you do this. Talk about how do you find OERs, because they're out there, but people tell us they don't know how to find them. And then we'll talk to teachers about the impact. What is it like to teach with these online materials and mix them maybe with commercial materials, or go completely on using OERs. And then the second day, our session, the last session, is called Bringing Open Education into the Foreign Language Profession. And there we're going to be talking about how do we create OERs for the profession to make them even more shareable than they already are. And finally, we have the grand finale. We have a couple of surprises for you. And that is about professional development as an open foreign language educator. How do you become an open foreign language educator? You may not identify yourself as one right now, but hopefully by the end of this symposium, you may have a taste of what that means. And we have a way to keep this symposium going. We have something called badges, professional certification for people who are interested in that, and that's where we will end up, is of course with the future. So before I begin today's presentation, here's our morning agenda, where I'm going to tell you briefly about COERLL, what we are and what we do, and then we'll talk about, as I said, defining open education and the impact on foreign language learning. And then you will envision the future together, okay, with an activity. And then we'll be hungry and even more food will show up. So, how do you say our name? Well, you can pronounce it like this, like a coral reef. That's actually what I intended when I was kind of playing around with this unpronounceable acronym. But it's really interesting to me because people pronounce it like this, COERLL, and that's okay, that's fine. I know what you're talking about. I heard somebody actually, this is true, COERLL, and I was looking through for the COERLL. Do you know what this is, right? So, dinnerware, this is actually a company called COERLL. And we're in Texas after all, so COERLL. All these pictures, by the way, are open photographs from the internet, right? So we're going to try to practice what we preach by openness and the practices surrounding openness. So the point is, of course, we don't care how you pronounce our acronym. It doesn't really matter, but the important part is the OER, which is at the center of our acronym. Center for Open Educational Resources and Language Learning. So about COERLL. Well, we are a National Foreign Language Resource Center, and there are 15 of us throughout the country, from the East Coast to the West Coast, even including Hawaii. Hawaii is one of the first. It was started in 1990 by the U.S. government. And so we're the new kid on the block. We're only 2 years old. We are headquartered here at the University of Texas at Austin. We were formerly, many of the staff, many of us were originally in an entity, a center called Texas Language Technology Center. And the shift from TLTC to COERLL is important because we were basically people interested in educational technology serving the needs of our institution. Now, of course, since we're federally funded, we want to serve the needs of the country, and even since we're putting it online, it's global education. And of course, we're focused on open education, and that makes a big difference. So the mission of all of the National Foreign Language Resource Centers, we all have the same mission, and that, of course, is to improve the teaching and learning of foreign languages in this country. And we do that by in many different ways. We, of course, produce materials. We put on workshops to train teachers. We develop assessments, different ways to assess proficiency. We also, very importantly, make materials for less commonly taught languages, or LICTLs, another acronym. So we all have the same mission. But we do have different personalities. The LRCs have slightly different personalities. And as I mentioned, we're focused, our mission then, to improve foreign languages. Well, we do that through the publication of OER, so Open Educational Resources. And that's a grab bag. That means many different things. That's reference grammars, corpora, assessment tools, etc. It's not just courses or textbooks. It's many different things. Okay, so that's who we are. Now let's start talking about open education. What we mean, and we of course is here at COERLL, but more generally what I think open educators mean by the term open education, has been nicely summarized by a little short video that I want to show you. And the video is actually the winner, the grand prize winner of a competition that was just announced in spring. And this was a collaborative effort. We're going to be talking a lot about collaboration between the Department of Education, Creative Commons, which is a nonprofit organization, a legal organization, to come up with alternatives to the copyright system, to the copyright laws, and something called the Open Society Foundations. This is not just about education, this is about making all societies more open, including economies and political structures and so forth. So this is an interesting group already of collaborators. It is international. It's not just the Department of Education, the U.S. Department of Education. So they were trying to see if we could crystallize it in a short 2-minute video what open education is all about. And of course, the winner comes to us from South Africa.
Education is vital. It enriches our lives, sustains our communities, and helps us grow into the future. At least, that's the idea. Truth is, education as we know it is failing millions around the world. Take Tando, for example. He's a bright kid with big dreams, but the education he's getting is holding him back. You see, Tando's school can't afford the latest learning materials, so he has to work with textbooks that are completely outdated. To make matters worse, Tando's teacher is also left using outdated information, often without even realizing it. And even if he manages to overcome this and gets into college, the cost of all the lessons, books, and notes he needs will land Tando in a pile of debt. It's not just Tando. This situation is being replayed in schools and colleges all around the world. So much for education for all. So how can we fix things? The answer lies in open education. Open education is a global movement that aims to bring quality education to teachers and students everywhere. The basic idea is to put top-notch learning materials on the web that anyone can access for free. You see, unlike textbooks, open ed resources can always be revised, so they're never out of date. Teachers are given free license to adapt them and improve them, giving students exactly what they need to achieve their dreams. As all open ed resources are free to share, schools are no longer limited by where they are or how much money they have. And if you think open education doesn't make the grade, think again. Open ed resources are being created by the world's most respected institutions and scholars. And the Obama administration is set to invest up to $2 billion in open ed in the next 4 years alone. From the highest branches of government right down to grassroots level, open education is changing lives. Visit creativecommons.org/education to learn more.
Okay, so this was a clever little promotional video for the notion of open education. It's an advertisement, essentially. And they were very smart politically. You know, they thought this is put on by the Department of Education, so they give a shout out to the Obama administration, and also to Creative Commons, who was promoting this. But essentially, the way it's constructed is we have a problem, and we're going to solve it with open educational practices. So real quickly, what were some of the problems that you picked up on? Tell me.
Outdated materials.
Outdated materials. Okay, so analog materials are quickly outdated. It takes a long time to get a textbook to market, and in technical fields as rocket science, I guess that teacher was doing rocket science. Yeah, they're outdated right away. What else? Cost. Number one, when people talk about open education, they associate that with the rising costs of textbooks. Surveys show that in most colleges now in the United States, it's $800 to $1,000 on textbooks a year. which is having a huge impact, particularly on minority populations, people who are maybe the first time they've gone to college, they don't have that college legacy in their family. It's sticker shock. It's keeping people out of the education marketplace. What else? What other problems does it seek to solve?
The remote locations of campuses.
Yeah, remote locations, the access. They don't have access for a lot of different reasons. What else? Anything else you picked up on? Those are the big ones. So much for, right in the middle of the promo, it says, so much for education for all. So the presupposition is education should be for everybody, and there are all kinds of barriers to that. We want, as open educators, to open up the riches of our institutions and spread them around. So it is kind of an altruistic, value-laden mission. So that's what we mean by open education. Here's a nice little definition that comes from where else but Wikipedia. A collective term that refers to forms of education in which knowledge, ideas, or important aspects of teaching methodology or infrastructure are shared freely over the internet. So it's not just about materials, we're talking more generally about the creation of knowledge and the dissemination of knowledge. I like this quote. It comes from Rich Baranick. Rich is a professor of computer science and electrical engineering at Rice University, just down the road here from Austin, in Houston. And Rich is also the founder of creations.org, one of the largest sites on the internet, places to go on the internet for open content, open educational content. It's essentially an archive. And he writes, the open education movement is based on a set of intuitions shared by a remarkably wide range of academics. That knowledge should be free and open to use and reuse, that collaboration should be easier, not harder, that people should receive credit and kudos for contributing to education and research, and that concepts and ideas are linked in unusual and surprising ways and not the simple linear forms that today's textbook present. So he adds the notion of this is a movement. There are lots of people kind of joining this movement, but notably he, I think, emphasizes that this is kind of an ideology or a value system. We believe that it should be more open. We believe that people should get credit. So there, again, this is kind of a presupposition that what we have right now is not as open as it should be, that people are working hard but not getting the credit that they deserve, that they should get, and so forth. So what we mean here at COERLL by OER, well, we're talking, OER means any educational material offered freely for anyone to use, typically, this is important, involving some permission to remix, improve, and redistribute. Okay, that doesn't mean just all online materials, right? So we need to think about what open means. So there are a lot of free access materials, lots of stuff on the internet that you can use. That is, they're online and they don't have a password and they don't have a fee. That's terrific. But when we talk about OERs, we really mean the 4 R's, and this is an idea from David Wiley, who's an educational technologist at Brigham Young. And he says reuse, that's the right to copy something verbatim. So everybody Xeroxes textbooks. You have something you want to bring to your class, you put it on the Xerox machine, you make 30 copies and you pass them out, and you've just violated copyright. You're not supposed to do that. But with open materials, you have permission to do that, copy verbatim. Redistribute. Well, you made 30 copies because you plan not just on making a copy for yourself, but giving them out to your students. It's really easy in the digital world to send something out, right? You post it to Facebook, and suddenly all of your Facebook followers have that PDF that you have, right? Now, a step further, of course, is revising, because you may want to go in a PDF you can't revise, but if you put it up in an editable form, then your students can actually have access to that material and edit it. And then one step even further is remixing. So you want to take that essay or that activity and combine it with somebody else's. So that's what we mean by OER. When we talk about OER, in the promo you've heard it's free, it's free. In the open source movement, which happened 20 years ago when the internet started, designers, web designers were saying, coders were saying, we should have the code. We want to join in and develop the code along with everybody else. So when we say free, there's a saying in the open source movement, free not as in free beer, but free as in free speech. So, but there are two meanings of open here. It does mean it's free for end users, that is, they don't pay for it all. It's not free for us who develop the materials, obviously, but it's free as in it's your right. You should share it. So another way of conceptualizing open is to think about it not in this binary distinction. You either are closed or you're open, but you're on a continuum. And this is also an idea that's been promoted by David Wiley. So note that I attribute ideas to people. That's very important. He talks about this continuum of openness. So there are traditional materials, analog print materials, that are closed because they have the C. That doesn't stand for closed. That stands for copyright. Right? So copyright means all rights reserved. You've seen that. That's closed. That's what all rights reserved means. OERs, as I just told you, says, well, you know, I'll give you some of these rights, and they are reuse, redistribute, revise, remix. You can play the game with me. In fact, I can even continue on the open continuum, and there's something called public domain. Do what you want to with this, I don't care. Okay, so there are materials online or images. I use some of those. You don't even have to attribute this. I don't care. Just use it. You can conceptualize teaching practices or classrooms as more or less open. The traditional classroom is tethered, I like that word, I read that somewhere, tethered to the real world. And we think the students as enrolled. They better be enrolled in my class, otherwise we kick them out, right? It would be very strange if a student wanders in, or a group of students wander into my class after 2 weeks and just sit down in the front row. But there are lots of blended spaces, cyber spaces where people are enrolled, but there are also portions of their courses which are public, right? And then all the way to totally open courses that are open just for the public in general. We can conceptualize research as more or less open. So the traditional forms of research are, of course, the researcher in humanities. It's typically one person, right? Writing a book, doing the research by him or herself. In sciences, typically we have then teams of researchers working together who may or may not be collaborating with other research teams in other locations. So it grows, it becomes more open in that way. But typically, traditional research, we as researchers know the methods and our data, and we don't share them freely. But there are more and more, there are attempts at opening things up to share with the public or interested parties our methods and our data, so we're including them in the actual research process. So it's not just only conducting research, it's also disseminating research. We can conceptualize it in terms of open and closed. I've given you the examples of two journals, Foreign Language Annals, since I'm talking to teaching foreign language teachers. That's a print journal, and you have access to that if you join ACTFL. It's part of your membership fee. So there are subscribed readers. Or you can access it by going to a library. As opposed to LLT, Language Learning and Technology, which is it's a totally open site in the sense that there's no password and no fees. Okay, another way of thinking about OER, big and little, and of course there's a continuum there as well. Big OERs, some of you know Français Interactif, we'll be talking about Accesso, we'll be talking about different OERs produced by some of our panelists. These are generated by institutions, big institutions like the University of Texas at Austin, or Carnegie Mellon, or MIT courseware, or the UK's Open University. There are lots of advantages, obviously. They have the reputation of a large institution. Typically, they're of high quality. You don't need to really repurpose it. It comes in a box. It looks like a textbook. And they're pretty easy to locate because you know that the University of Texas has a big presence on the web. The disadvantages, of course, they're expensive to make. And they're not native to the web. And by this, I mean that they look like a textbook, and the conceptualization of a textbook originated before the web. So they're maybe being ported to the web, but they're not originating somehow in the web thought. And their reuse of those 4 R's, they're kind of limited. We say we want to do all those things and promote sharing, but it still is somewhat limited. On the other end of the spectrum, there are lots of people, individuals, producing lots of really cool things, and they're native to the web because they're using all kinds of technologies that are native. They're easy to remix. The disadvantages, of course, they may be not the greatest quality. You're not able to discern the reputation. They're hard to locate because Fred has come up with this great new tool for morphology, or this lesson on preterite imperfect. But who's going to find Fred's homepage, right? So the examples, blog posts and podcasts, things like that. So we'll be talking about the spectrum and how to move back and forth between the two. So another way of thinking about OERs is to talk about it in terms of enablers. By the way, the term OER was coined in 2002 at a UNESCO meeting because it dawned on people that, we've really entered a new age. We're creating knowledge in a different way. We should have materials that are more dynamic and that support this new kind of knowledge creation. And so part of this ecology is open licenses, Creative Commons, open standards. I'll be telling you a little bit about what that means, a general way of talking among a group. The technology itself, different kinds of technology that supports sharing, and communities of practice. That's a very important part. So open licenses. As I mentioned, Creative Commons, that's the CC. It's when we talk about copyright, Creative Commons is really copyleft. So instead of saying all rights reserved, some rights reserved. You can play the game with me. And however, all open licenses from Creative Commons means attribution. That's why it's bold-faced here. In other words, whatever you do, you must give credit to the educator for whatever, other researcher or whatever. Right? Now, you can also talk about it in terms of derivatives. Should I allow this person to make a derivative work from my work? Maybe. That's up to you to decide as the author. Should I let this person make a profit? I'm not making a profit off my materials, but if you want to, hey, go ahead. Some people say, no, I'm a nonprofit, you should be a nonprofit. And then the share alike. We can specify how we want you to share these materials. So again, open licenses themselves are on a degree of this continuum. So, and the most closed open license, if that makes any sense, right? These are all CC licenses. You see the CC in the circle. It's a Creative Commons, and it says by. So that means attribution. You have to use this and then attribute it who you're using it, who developed it. It says NC, which means non-commercial. You may not use this textbook or this OER for your profit. And ND, no derivatives. So no remixing. Okay. On the other hand, if, the most open license of all, and I believe there are 6 licenses right now in Creative Commons. Look, just attribute it to us, but do what you want. Okay, most open. Standards. Now, ACTFL, of course, has this notion of proficiency guidelines. Those circles over there, interconnecting, or you might recognize them, those are the national standards. We have the Common European Framework. These are ways of talking about a field that we somehow share. Okay? And if we were to adopt then build materials that that adopt these standards, then people kind of know what we're talking about. A good example, we also have state standards here in the United States, so different states have different curricular standards. A good example of this, taking standards, is LARC. I have a shout out to my friends at LARC. It's the Language Acquisition Resource Center in San Diego State. And they've come up with this really cool little OER. It's more on the little side of the spectrum. It's called a lesson plan generator. And because people in California, they have their own standards, so they're generating lessons that then meet the California standards. Okay? So technology is pretty obvious. They're all technology right now, social media is booming, and it's all about sharing. So you found an article today in the New York Times, you want to share it with your people, and you just click on Facebook, and boom, you send it out to everyone. Or you post it to Facebook, or you send it to your Twitter account, and so forth. So here at COERLL, we've been thinking about how to make things more shareable. And we have a discussion, and I hope that we'll have more discussions, about how to modularize content. For example, French Interactive, people use this in all kinds of ways, and they don't want to adopt the whole thing. If they just want to use our videos, they can just download the videos, and that's fine. We talked about embeddable media, so if we have a video and they don't want that video, they can switch it out, embed something else. Editable formats. PDFs, if you make a document in a PDF, that's not editable. But if you have Google Docs, for example, then lots of people can change it. We've also talked about multiple formats because surveys show that students and teachers don't want just a textbook anymore. They want it available in lots of different options. And by the way, they don't want just electronic versions. They want the print version too. They want it all. Importantly, all of this is happening in communities of practice because where people really share, of course, with others, and that happens in communities. So we have different communities represented here. We have teacher organizations, AATF, American Association of Teachers of French. We have professional organizations like Calico, so instructional technologists that talk to each other. We have Drupal. Drupal is an open course management software, so software developers and we're building things in Drupal so that we can give it to other institutions, and if they have Drupal software developers, they can extend it and play with it and drive it in new directions. We have archivists. Merlot and OER Commons are large archives that have lots of content, but importantly they have editorial teams. They have people who are working to curate that content. And then there are more and more. We have people like Live Mocha, which is a commercial enterprise, but they're trying to open up. They're trying to see. They're trying to experiment with open practices. So let me talk to you a little bit about some of the initiatives that are represented by some of the people here today that I've invited to talk to us, and they are themselves somewhat on a continuum of openness. And I think I want to make that point clear. Yes, we are here to promote open education, but this is really evolving quickly. It's a moving target, and people have the right to choose what their comfort level, where they are on the spectrum. So Fernando Rubio at the University of Utah has developed, a Spanish professor at Utah, has developed a terrific hybrid course. And this is not open. It's password protected, right? As he would admit himself, right? He's right here in the audience. But interestingly, it is half based on commercial product, Nexos, and that is by Heinley, or what's the? Cengage, okay? But he has developed, he said, but 50% of the course, it's a hybrid course, so he's trying to do half of it online, half in the classroom. So he's actually developed half the course with his developmental team, and so that's kind of interesting. What you see are people more and more developing their own materials, or at least people extending a commercial product, right? So that's one example of a hybrid course. It's not really, wouldn't meet the criteria of perhaps online. Maybe we can talk about what can we do to make Fernando make this an online course, or maybe we can't because there are institutional barriers at Utah. Moving on the continuum, we have Carnegie Mellon's Open Learning Initiative. Carnegie Mellon is one of the big players. When people talk about open education, they always cite MIT, and Carnegie Mellon is right up at the top of the list. And it's because of this OLI. These are entire courses that are available. They're open access courses, primarily in the sciences and technology, so physics and statistics, courses like that. You can take them for free. You can just take the course because it's open, or you can sign up for credit. But again, it doesn't play the game of the 4 R's. You're not allowed to take it and revise their course. No, it wasn't conceived in that way. It's also, I think, important because they've invested heavily in something called learner analytics. So as people go through a course, it's also, it's a research project. It takes information about how people learn using these materials. Maybe moving farther along the continuum, accesso. And I forgot to mention Chris Jones. We have Chris here, is the French developer for the online course at Carnegie Mellon with a team of people there. From the University of Kansas, we have a course called Accesso. It was actually Fernando who told me about Accesso about a year ago. I went online and looked at it and thought, wow, this is terrific. Again, it's a collaborative effort. There are many people who've developed it, but we have with us today Amy Rosamondo and Jonathan Perkins. Amy, it's interesting as a collaborative effort between technology, a technologist, and a content provider. So Amy, a Spanish professor, Jonathan is the director of their language center. So we'll talk about how they created it collaboratively. But again, we see here they have a Creative Commons license, yay. But they also say, no, we don't want you to make derivative works. We want you to use this, and that's fine. They have that prerogative to do that. But in reading, Amy is published on Accesso. She's talking very much like an open educator. She wants to inspire others to create modules that look like Accesso. Again, it's an intermediate Spanish program. And then we've been at this game for a long time, so I would say we're more open according to the criteria that we gave you. We have a Français Interactif here at UT. We have, and I have George Denibo's name here because he's going to be talking. He's not a developer, but in a way he is. He's teaching with it and really extending it in ways that the developers hadn't envisioned. And he can do that because we have a CC license that's completely open. Just give us credit for some of this. We started it, but you take it in whatever direction you want. So I'm going to quickly go through a couple of other slides here to show you that open is not just for foreign language teaching and textbooks, but it can touch on many different areas. Here at COERLL, we're producing lots of open materials for lectors, as I said, so less commonly taught. We just finished last year a Yoruba textbook. This is important because, of course, with the financial crisis that's hitting higher education, publishing companies really can't take this on. They don't make any money publishing lector materials. So that's part of our mission is to partner with professors in these areas, content developers, and develop good lector materials. This is a really interesting website project. This Open Spanish Corpus, I talked about corpora being tools too for teaching. And we have Jacqueline Toribio. So Jacqueline is our project director. She is a linguist in the Department of Spanish and Portuguese here. And one of two project directors, Barbara Bullock, also a linguist in the French department, French and Italian, is partnering with her to produce this. And the idea here is to go out around the state of Texas and just conduct sociolinguistic interviews. These interviews, of course, are videotaped and transcribed by the end of the summer. So we're August 9th. Hopefully by the end of August, we will have 100, this is our goal, 100 videotaped interviews, all transcribed, and the transcriptions all synced to the interviews. That's already huge, right? So you'll be able to click on a word, and it takes you right to that part in the interview. They have a sociolinguistic goal, which is to document the linguistic landscape of Texas here, of Spanish here in Texas. But we hope to also then use this corpus as a place for teachers to develop authentic materials or materials around authentic Spanish as it's spoken here in Texas. Real quickly, open source tools. It's not for any particular language. This is an annotation tool that we're working on. eComma, you can have a classroom all together annotating a text. Why would you want to do that? Well, for all kinds of different reasons. For reading through a text, or if you want to focus them on particular forms. There are lots of different uses for annotation. And also, as I mentioned, this is being done in Drupal, which is an open source. So when we launch it, hopefully January, February, people can then continue to develop it. So we have, there are just a couple other projects, Gateway to Chinese, Conversa Brasileira, Azwat Arabia. I just invite you to take a look at our website for lots of the materials that we're developing. Okay, so why do all this work? Because it is work. Why spend your time making materials and then just giving them away? Well, we do believe that there are true benefits to the learner. Obviously, many of those things were cited in the video, that promotional video that you watched, so they lower the cost. Most of our materials are available either for free or for a nominal fee. The materials, as we said, can be localized to classrooms, and that really changes things, because textbooks, by their nature, have to be generic because they want the biggest market share. But everybody adapts textbooks. Everybody does this. We're trying to then design materials to make that localization easier. Community involvement leads to quality control. That's the idea behind the PDF. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't always work as well. But the idea is really, I think, captured by the word "in-reach," which is a word I heard Rich Bernick use this year. So we talk about outreach. Part of COERLL is to conduct outreach. That's what we're doing right now, to explain ourselves and our practices to a community. But once we give materials away that are editable, people have in-reach. The materials come back to us in forms that we hadn't imagined, practices that we hadn't imagined, and they're better than what we had imagined. So that's the idea of in-reach. And learners, of course, can become part of the creation process. They have a different sense of ownership. Learners often, as we will see, become teachers. Benefits to educators, and there are a lot. We truly believe that your materials will have a greater impact if you open them up. You can reach more people. We have millions of people using our statistics, kind of boggle our minds. And you can actually gain recognition. Here in a university atmosphere, the question of tenure, do you get tenure based on open materials? That's a big question. It's hotly debated. But we do know it has great impact. You have more control over your own materials. Program fees from print on demand help with sustainability. Sustainability is obviously, that's probably not just for educators, that's for administrators, because here at COERLL, as we're fighting budget cuts, we need to think about sustainability. And finally, I mentioned high quality materials for less commonly taught languages. But really, I think the big deal for me has been creating a community of practice with other colleagues around materials. So, what are the challenges? Well, there are many. It takes a lot of work. Teachers tell us all the time, you know, I like this idea, but to select and to sequence, shouldn't somebody else be doing that job for me? Should that be my job? That's a lot of work. I don't want to do it. Okay? That's true, but there are benefits to actually taking things apart and thinking about it. But of course, not all teachers have that time. Educators, of course, we found out need training and support and seminars such as this to help them understand how to put things together, and that's what we're going to teach you the next day and a half. There's a lot of skepticism about the quality of OERs. They're still not on par with commercial materials. Right? And finally, and the last 2 points, I go around and give talks, and I ask teacher groups, so who's heard of OER or open education? And in a group of 30, I might have 1 hand or 2 hands. So we still have a lot of education to do. And of course, issues of sustainability. Again, I said these are free for you to use. They're not free for us to make. So I want to end with this idea. And this is from Clay Shirky, who published this book in 2010 called Cognitive Surplus. He coined this term. Clay Shirky is a professor at NYU of New Media Studies. And his notion of cognitive surplus is captured, of course, in this little graphic here of a crowd coming together, a group of people coming together in an additive way. to create something that they hadn't been able to do as individuals, coming together in a way that adds up for society. So the subtitle is How Technology Makes Consumers, Passive Consumers, into Collaborators. So when Clay wrote this book, and you can imagine people started really discussing it, it was a very provocative idea. And this is a great example of extending an idea. Many people started visualizing Clay's ideas. One of the examples he gives in his book is this big square here, you see. And you see the tiny little square down there? So he gives lots of facts and figures about leisure time activities and different kinds of things that people are involved in. 200 billion hours a year spent watching television by American adults. 200 billion. That's a lot of time, a lot of free time. So he kind of talks about, he's not bashing television watching, by the way. He's into all kinds of media. But of course, people have talked about television as being relatively passive. We sit in front of the television and we receive content. We can't change the content. We just receive the content. Okay. That little tiny block down there means 100 million hours of people, 100 million hours to create Wikipedia. So all the people who've given their time to create Wikipedia. It's tiny, it's a fraction. Now here's the interesting thing he points out. Television watching has been going up ever since television was invented. It's been going up and up and up and up and up and up. Except recently, it's been going down. Why would that be? Maybe because there's no good content, right? I have DirecTV, I have hundreds of channels, and it's all junk. Some of it's okay, but it's not that, really. He says the people are migrating from television to the internet. They're doing more and more things. Now, maybe you can actually watch television on the internet. You can do that. But they're going to the internet, and that makes a huge difference because, again, the content that's coming to you, sometimes it is editable, so you can change it. And then, importantly, you can share it, and it comes back to you. Now, this is what he means by cognitive surplus. We've got a lot of time on our hands and a lot of brain power on our hands. And I want to talk to you then, personalize this graphic and think in terms of foreign language education or practices. Teachers spend a lot of time developing their own materials. They may not consider them materials. Syllabi, lesson plans. In a couple of weeks, the University of Texas will start classes, and I will be frantically putting together all kinds of course descriptions, materials, right? And each time I do this, whether I'm writing a quiz or an exam, I think, I know there are lots of people out there who are doing exactly the same thing. But we're all individuals watching television. Okay, so if we could do this game together, how powerful would that be? That's the idea of cognitive surplus, and I think that's the idea of open education. Okay, and as I said, all the links, all of the PowerPoints, everything we're sharing here today with you of PDFs, it will be on this website, The Power of Openness. So you don't need to take down all the URLs. It's all there for you. So we have some time now for Q&A. I want you to ask questions or make comments. Let's just have at it. And again, from the people who are connecting to online, please post your queries or your comments so that our moderator can tell me about them. Okay.
Yeah, Carl, you made an interesting point about the rank and tenure process at most universities. The standard, of course, is peer review. And I'm not sure, but are you aware of any similar process that is available right now for open source?
Okay, the question is it's a great question about tenure and peer review and people who spend a lot of time making materials in this open education universe. Why would they do that since they seem to be putting themselves at risk right now? Or the question is will they get tenure? For those of us at Research One institutions, that's a big question. Things are changing, and I can point to other disciplines that are, I think, much farther ahead than, let's say, foreign language disciplines or humanities in general. And that comes from the sciences. There are now ways of doing peer review on open materials. So if you go to connections.org, they have materials in electrical engineering, for example, that are reviewed by editorial teams. They send them out to all the professional organizations in electrical engineering, and they write up their evaluations of these materials. So there are now ways of doing this even on the internet. So the idea is catching on, right? But I mean, I think when I talk to people about this, and the water cooler talk, it still is very much, well, my institution is coming around, but they're not there yet. Chris?
Comment on that front. First of all, the conventional tenure track is no longer ubiquitous. I myself am on a teaching track, which really rewards this kind of activity.
And I just want again, I want to say, somebody made a comment here that this is from somebody who is on a teaching track at a university and says, well, it is rewarded. It depends, of course, on your position within the university. So if you're a clinical teaching professor, then it would be, or a lecturer, that would be rewarded. But it depends on your position in the university.
Well, and there are two examples that I know of within my context. One, a tenure stream chemistry professor who is part of the Chem Collective, which is a national organization. For grouping both secondary and higher ed chemistry professors. He started off, of course, on the tenure track, did nothing but OER stuff, essentially. And eventually his department said, well, this is what you're doing, and you're doing it incredibly well. We'll make this the basis for your tenure, because it makes sense. The chair of our philosophy department did the same thing, essentially. He was in a teaching track, was the person who did the logic course and was eventually tenured on that basis. So you have to do it well. It's not a question of being a fourth line player in a large project. It's still...
No, right, and so that's my point about electrical engineering. You're right, there are still professional organizations who can still have peer review within an open context. Yeah.
The open context also involves peers, or peers.
But there are many more peers, actually.
More peers, and who are also willing to write for you with the collaboration is fruitful.
Right. Any other questions or comments? David?
The distinction that Clay made between consumers and collaborators, you gave us some numbers there, and you made a comment about the decline of TV watching under the category of consumers. Do you, or does Clay or anyone else have any sense of the trajectory of collaborators? Is that number increasing? What sense do we have of the movement of collaboration, particularly within the context of OER?
Okay, so the question is about, in reference to that last slide, the visualization of cognitive surplus with people watching television versus people collaborating to write Wikipedia. So the question was about, does Clay Shirky know the numbers of people who are, is there more collaborations? Is there a sense that there's more collaboration today, number one? And number two, what's the impact on OER? Yes, he does talk about that, because cognitive surplus, the idea of having a lot of brain power that's just lying around, he makes the point very clear that the internet has unleashed something in people, which is creativity, but it's the social kind of creativity. There's a lot of collaboration. LOL cats, for example, lol cats. People love to create these kinds of memes, for example, that, it's a kind of akin to watching television, junk TV. It feels fun, it's good, whatever, but that's not exactly what he's talking about when he talks about the greater good. But I mean, his book gives lots of examples of things like open education, that is, collaborative effort that is for the common good. And I do think that is taking off. And it's because of all of those enablers that I talked about that are coming together. So it's technology, but it's not just technology. It's, of course, these kind of communities. that have been kind of turbocharged by the technology. So, yeah. So I do think that, well, according to his book, he says that more and more people are now acting collaboratively, but it's not just collaboration in the sense that we know it. That's another point, too. It's this kind of massive, self-organizing, complexity-theoretic approach to collaboration. Other questions? Yes?
I have a question about, you were talking about the little OERs, and I'm just wondering how people can do quality control. And my example is that I developed some materials within the context of a PhD course. So this material included feedback from peers and the instructor. I guess I feel a little bit nervous about letting anybody just change these materials because they may not be informed by the current research that I put into that.
Okay, that's a terrific question. So the question is about quality control in small or little OER. And the example given is somebody who has created, was it a lesson plan or?
It was a lesson plan and materials.
A lesson plan and her materials, you're wondering whether you should really let people have the right to remix, revise your materials if they're not aware of exactly how you, the premise of the materials and how they should be put together. Okay, well, I certainly have a response, but I wonder if anybody else would like to tackle that. Anybody else want to? Well, I'll start. It was a leap of faith when okay, so you're talking about a lesson plan. We talk about a whole entire curriculum that we spent years developing, and now we're saying, you guys go do. If you completely open up your materials, yes, you will be assured people will do things that will make you cringe. And even worse than that. On the other hand, you can't have this unintended consequence without opening it up. There are people who can drive this in a different direction that you never thought, of, and it's brilliant. So you can't have one without the other, is what I would say. So it's the scary part of opening it up, right? You will have people who will drive it in the wrong direction, but people who will take it places where you just had never thought. Yes?
I'm just going to add to that. I've used some of the COERLL materials in my French classes, and perhaps I've made you cringe with things I've done. But every group of students is so unique that I think, independent of where you are in the world or the country or what level you're at, you may need to adapt the materials. And that's what's so great about this collaboration and the ability to do that.
Well, and that brings up, so somebody said she used some of our materials, and maybe she's doing things with them that are cringe-worthy. We don't know. Listen, publishers, they produce a textbook. We don't know what people do. People are adapting materials, but they may follow the intentions of the authors, but they may not. So it's not really any different. That problem, I would say, is not really any different than if you're using commercially produced or closed materials. I want to take a question. Yes?
Also, I think one of the barriers to using some of the open material online is, for example, in our school system, if too many people are online at the same time, it shuts the whole thing down.
Right.
So where I have tried to use COERLL before as well, and to bring it up at, let's say, 8 o'clock, by 10 o'clock when I need to use it, it's mixed.
Okay, so we have somebody who's raising an issue, a technical issue, about her school where she would like to use open materials, but she finds that because there's just too many people using the materials at her school, it slows down or it crashes.
We can't use it.
They can't use it at the school.
We get a message saying too many people are on the internet.
Right. So this is the idea of, live by technology, die by technology. So if you're completely dependent on technology and then you can't get access, that's the worst position, right? It's like being a speaker here to give a PowerPoint and it's not working. Yeah. I'm sorry, what did you say though?
I said when I have been able to get on, it's been very enriching material
Right.
for my students.
And yeah, I'll call you in just a sec. So when we often talk to teachers about this, they have their own set of problems, and that's the whole point of a community of practice, because they are in the trenches and they have lots of workarounds. They tell you, oh, well, this is what I've done when this happens. We can't, as developers, there's so many different local problems. We have no way of, we can't know all of those. But lots of people have very ingenious ways of working around. You can, of course, download some of that content and make it local to your own classroom. Jonathan?
Just a point of clarification, is the problem that COERLL has too much traffic, or that
No,
your school has
our
too much traffic?
school has too much traffic.
Yeah, so the problem is really at a local level, the school has too much traffic for them to use a lot of open materials. Yeah, so of course, you just need better infrastructure. You need more money. You need a school bond is what you need.
Yeah, so it's interesting that you're having this discussion because we were just informed that the entire UT network has gone down.
Oh!
We're all completely offline right now and we don't have a workaround. So yeah, so hopefully
Wow, this has never happened.
I'm very quickly typing the questions and answers in the chat room.
Are you
for
still
you.
in?
Yeah, I'm using my Wi-Fi hotspot, so I'm doing it.
I thought the whole thing went down.
Well, yours is down, but I'm doing it.
Okay, so
Yeah,
people are still
in the chat room.
Thanks, George.
no, but you can't get online.
We do
Yeah.
have a workaround.
I'm your backup.
Typing it up.
Yes.
So the meeting is
I have the impression that education is moving towards the open source community and format, and I just signed a contract with a big university publisher, publishing house for small textbooks in Arabic. And I'm wondering now, is there any reason for a lecturer or a professor to go through the old traditional way instead of going through the new technologies? Because I feel we still have some pressure of publishing out there and having like a textbook, and we don't have something that people can touch. It seems like we don't do anything.
So the question is, if this is where education is moving towards more and more open materials, is there any purpose then of continuing to publish commercial materials? You guys, who's recently published commercial materials? Fernando, aren't you working on some? Well, okay, well, what's your motivation for working on a commercial textbook?
Well, I would say if you're not completely convinced that this is going to work for you, that going fully open is going to work for you, try something in between. Try to convince your publisher to do part of what you're working on as open materials and part of it as
Right.
traditional.
We've been trying to give away these ideas to publishers for a long time, and some of them are receptive and some of them aren't. So the idea, I think, which is an obvious giveaway, is let's create a community of practice around my textbook. That seems to be so obvious, but they're not very good at doing that because most of the editors are not digital natives, let's say. So we want people who live their lives on the internet to tell us, how can I take this and extend this in this more distributed cyberspace? So I think you're absolutely right. It's not, again, either or. It's really on a continuum. So, and publishers are really, they have, when we first started this, they've really moved a lot. I put Live MOOC as a representation of a commercial entity that understands openness, and they are trying now to figure out how to make open a profitable exercise, right? So, yeah, they're very interested in that because obviously if you grow a community of practice, that's a larger market. Yes, we need to take a break, so quickly get some coffee. There are a lot of migas back there, and then we'll set up for our next activity. Yes.
Can I ask one quick question from the online group?
One quick question from the online group.
What are your strategies for advertising, publicizing your OER products to get users?
To get users. Can you write this in?
Yeah,
so the question is, what do you do to advertise your products to get more users? We go to conferences. We have a Facebook site, we use social media. We put our materials online and we make sure that they are searchable. And that's a very, very important question that we have actually devoted an entire session to, which is called searching for OER, finding them, okay? So I'm just going to say that that person should tune back in to that session, okay? Okay, so I don't know about you, but before we have our group activity, I need a little bit of coffee. And so just a couple of minutes, and then we'll start back with our activity, okay?
George, can you tell them we're taking a couple of minutes for coffee?
Thank you so much.
Unbelievable.
Something happened to East Texas. They have so many events here. The last workshop though, we're in the middle of a presentation fire drill. Okay, so at least we don't have to go stand out in the 100-degree weather. Yeah, but that's at least not, the whole network. But we still have to have somebody cut the fiber up on cable between after those. And for years, we didn't have a backup group. I think now we actually have something to go to back, so it's taking forever. I'm really surprised that it's
How long is the break?
Can you connect to your Wi-Fi? It's actually an unscheduled break. I can see your Wi-Fi.
Again, you won't get out. I can't. I was thinking about you.
I mean, that way I can moderate the chat.
Are you using like an admin instance of
She's a host.
Adobe? Oh, okay, all right.
She's a host.
Okay, well, let me disconnect my
I mean,
iPad.
technically then that might be a little challenging to try and.
Unless, but then he won't be able to be on, we can't both be using.
Yeah, I have multiple things connected to it. Give me a second.
Well, if